Welcome, travelers, to episode 1 of the Time Travel Trio podcast. I'm Jen, your discussion leader for this episode.
And I'm Matt.
And I'm Hyde.
And we are the Time Travel Trio. Welcome. Thank you for listening to our first episode. So, we did do an introduction episode. It's a short 15-minute podcast episode that if you want to listen to, it's also up. Just sort of a get to know us and why we like time travel, that sort of thing. So please feel free to listen to that. And we just wanted to give a quick introduction for those who did not listen to the introduction episode of who we are. So I'm Jen. I love movies and TV, and time travel is a big theme in all the stuff that I love.
Yeah, and I'm Matt, and I like, movies, TV as well, but I also love astrophysics and science in general. So the real life kind of time travel is kind of where my expertise lies.
And I'm Hyde. I am a filmmaker. I love film, love writing, and art, and history.
And there you go. So today's movie, of course, is Back to the Future, and this episode was released on Back to the Future Day, which is actually from the second movie. October 21st, 2015 is the date that Marty travels to
the future.
So we figured what a great starting off point for our time travel podcast. So here we are. So for those who don't know, the synopsis of the first Back to the Future movie, which is what we're going to be discussing today, is that a young man is accidentally set 30 years into the past in a time-traveling DeLorean invented by his friend, Dr. Emmett Brown, and must make sure his high school-age parents unite in order to save his own existence.
High stakes.
High stakes. Either they're together or you're done. It's pretty much...
And it'd
be
a direct fault of you being there.
True.
Or why they're not together.
Talk about consequences. So, this movie was directed by Robert Zemeckis, one of the greats, who also co-wrote it with Bob Gale. The movie, of course, stars Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd, Leah Thompson, Crispin Glover, etc. And was produced by Steven Spielberg, whose name is... He's on the poster. He's all about this movie. He loves this movie. This is, you think of Spielberg, this is one of the movies. This and E.T. I feel like are the big Spielberg movies.
Well, this was the first movie that Spielberg had done with Universal Amblin, his company, that did E.T. that was not directed by him. He just wanted to produce it.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and it was, of course, Steven Spielberg basically invented the summer blockbuster. Mm-hmm. So when this came out in 1985, summer 1985, actually originally it was going to be late in the summer, kind of as a summer wind down. But Universal, when they started seeing test footage, they were so excited about it, they moved it up more close to the July 4th weekend.
That's great. Did you know that this movie actually won an Academy Award for Best Effects for sound effects editing?
I did know that.
And it was also nominated for Best Writing, Screenplay, Best Sound, and Best Music Original Song for The Power of Love by Huey Lewis and the News.
Well deserved.
Well deserved, yeah. That's pretty great. Nominated for 4, won 1. Not too shabby. So we're going to play the original 1985 theatrical trailer for the film, and then we'll discuss it afterwards because it's kind of interesting way to portray the movie. So here is that.
Steven Spielberg presents Back to the Future, a Robert Zemeckis film. Marty leads an ordinary life.
No McFly ever amounted to anything in the history of Hill Valley.
Well, history is going to change.
And 1985 is not his year. But Dr. Brown is about to change all that.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
He's sending Marty 30 years back in time.
It works! It's a flying saucer from outer space!
Now, he's trapped in the past.
gotta be a dream.
About to meet
Chocolate.
his future father.
He's a peeping Tom.
Wow!
And he's making an impression on his mother.
He's an absolute dream. And he can sleep in my room.
Anything you do could have serious repercussions on future events.
Now he's got to make his mother and father fall in love.
For crying out loud, I haven't even been born yet.
And only Dr. Brown can help him get back to the future.
Are you telling me that this sucker is nuclear? Precisely.
Michael J. Fox,
Whoa, this is heavy.
Christopher Lloyd,
There's that word again, heavy. Why are things so heavy in the future? Is there a problem with the Earth's gravitational pull?
Back to the Future.
So, first of all, I have to stop myself from laughing while I'm watching that trailer because it's so ridiculous.
Yeah, trailers were so different back then.
They really were, and I would be interested if anyone has or wants to make sort of an updated trailer for that movie. I'd be very interested to see how it would be kind of portrayed with today's audience. The thing that really sticks out in my mind of that trailer more than anything is when they show his dad, and it's just like chocolate, and it slides down the. I mean, I guess that's like a cool.
That's the
bit
only
in the
cool
movie,
moment
but
of his father.
really,
Before he,
Before he becomes a man.
yeah.
yeah, right. Like it seemed ridiculous. But if you guys want to watch that trailer, it is up on YouTube, which is where I found it. So search for that and have a laugh with us because it's pretty ridiculous.
If you want to see, it's not a trailer per se, but it's kind of a supercut of the first Back to the Future. There's a great guy on YouTube named Oliver Harper. If you check out Oliver Harper's YouTube channel, he likes to recut old movie trailers before he does a little commentary on them.
Cool.
And he has one that's a little bit more modern in the way it does it. Obviously, it spoils more than the average movie trailer would. Well, actually, I don't know. Sometimes it's debatable.
Yeah,
But it is a kind of more of a modern take on the Back to the Future trailer because this one is really corny, but it's it's the 80s. Everything's
Yeah.
corny.
Very true. Of course, Power of Love is a great song associated with this movie more than anything, I would say. And we'll talk about Huey Lewis a little bit when we get more into the discussion. But I just thought that trailer was interesting and wanted to watch it because it is very campy, I think. It's very, pushing the comedy aspect of it, I think. And it is a comedy, but I don't know, when I think Back to the Future, I just think, great,
Sci-fi.
light sci-fi movie that's relatable for all audiences, which leads to why I love this movie. It's one of my top 5 favorite movies of all time. Absolutely. And that's why I love it, is because it is relatable. It's, it challenges you to think about, the situation that Marty's put in when he travels back to the past and has to fix his parents and all that stuff. So why, Matt, do you like or dislike this movie?
I mean, obviously, I love the movie. It's a great movie. I like that it takes a complicated idea like time travel, but makes it really relevant to the story, and also makes it builds the tension more because you know what should happen. And if it doesn't happen, Marty's going to essentially never exist. So it just makes the storytelling so much better, while still also being pretty consistent and pretty interesting use of time travel, I think. I was too young to watch it when it came out in theaters, but I saw it when I was way too young to even remember it. So watching it again for the podcast, actually sitting down and watching it almost for the first time, I rediscovered my love for the movie and just how good of a movie it really is. Also, mostly about time travel.
Yeah. Well, I saw it when I was a little bit older, and my parents I think I was probably 8 or 9 when I first saw it. My parents were very cautious about having me see it because there's actually quite a bit of language in it for a family film. And so there's a lot of sex talk and everything. There's actually a near rape or sexual assault scene too. So it's actually, even though it's billed as a family movie, it's definitely an older family movie. Really 10 and up. It's really what you want to probably have watching this movie.
Yeah.
And well, I think what's interesting about the time travel, what's interesting about the time travel in the first Back to the Future is that we're given a very tangible way to see how things are being affected in the past and future. There's not a whole bunch of a lot of movies when they go back to the future or they go to the past, you kind of just see things, you're kind of left to guess how that's going to affect stuff. But here it's you're given, in screenwriting they call it the plastic egg sometimes, and you're given this piece of paper, it's a photograph, and as things get worse, he starts to disappear in the photograph, and his brothers and sisters. So there's like almost like the kind of the what do you call those? The sun, the sand. What do you call those? The dials, basically.
Right.
It's like, you can tell that time is running out.
Yeah, and plus in Act 1, they set up all this stuff, like, we met when my dad hit him with his car, and then I fell in love with him on the night of the dance. So there's this time frame that we know, okay, if they don't fall in love on the dance, that's when future can be changed,
Right.
beyond repair.
Well, since we're on it, there is a quote that that his mom says, if Grandpa hadn't hit him, none of you would have been born. So it literally, and that's the same scene when they're talking about how they met and how they fell in love. And literally, in that entire scene, it spells out what the movie needs to do, which is, I think, a very interesting way to tell the story because, as a first-time viewer, you feel like you already know what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But, Marty experiences things that he doesn't expect, so we don't expect it. And so it does kind of, it's not as simple as, here you go, kiss, like trying to push people's faces together.
Right,
You know what
right.
I mean?
Right.
But since we're into it already, let's start with really how physically does Marty, because he's really, other than the dog, is the one who time travels, how does he do it?
Yeah, so Doc Brown, he invents the flux capacitor. He thinks of it in the 50s, but actually makes it real in the 80s, in the present day, more or less. He makes the flux capacitor. He powers it by stealing plutonium, which is able to generate the 1.21 gigawatts.
Which he keeps under his bed, by the way, which I think is just hilarious, but yeah.
Right. And then with that, with those two components and the 88 miles per hour, the DeLorean is able to go through time.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, for discussion's sake, we'll say that the 1985 is quote-unquote the present, just for referring to that, because even though for us it is now 30 years, it's present in the film compared to the past is the 1955 time jump. So what are the rules of this time travel? What can the time traveler do or not do? So when Marty's in the DeLorean, there's like a clock, I guess, sort of, that you punch in the date and the time of exactly where you want to go, when you want to go, I guess I should say, because it really just takes you where you are physically and just jumps you back. You don't transport through space, just through time. So Doc is explaining to Marty he's talking about time travel and explaining how it works, and he mentions to Marty, November 5th, I think it is, 1955. Yes. Red letter date and whatever. That's the date that I fell off my toilet and hit my head and invented time travel with the flux capacitor. And so that was the last date that was shown on the screen. And so when Marty jumps in the DeLorean to escape from the Libyans, he accidentally hits it, turns it on, and ends up going 88 miles an hour and jumps through time. But the rules, I guess, in that sense is that with this machine, you have to have plutonium to make the time jump. And because they were preparing for Doc to travel to the future, was the idea, the future from 1985, he put plutonium in, and then the Libyans came, and then Marty had to escape, they shot Doc, etc., etc. But Marty didn't bring any plutonium with him, so he jumps to 1955 and is then trapped. So
no more plutonium.
Right. And it's, as they mentioned in the film, it's not easy to come by plutonium.
Right.
Yeah, so the entire, I guess, journey that he has to go through is essentially get to where the lightning strikes the clock tower, which is set up in Act 1. They say in 1955, the clock tower was struck by lightning. So they know at some point lightning will hit that tower, and that's enough energy to generate the 1.21 gigawatts that the Doc needs. So the issue that Marty has is to get to that day without messing up the past too much, because the rules of time travel that this movie sets up is anything you do in the past will affect the future.
Mm-hmm. So that also means that it's very much the butterfly effect, that in the normal timeline, Marty has not traveled to the past. And so everything was as it should be. When Marty time travels to the past, if he steps on a butterfly, so to speak, it would affect the future.
Right.
So it's not the sort of case which we will see in probably different movies that the time jumper, or time traveler, I guess I should say, has already been there. And the things that you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
That's not the case in this movie. Anything that Marty does, anyone who he speaks to, affects the future in a different way. It's a different timeline because he's there. So, because of that, it really sets up the entire story that he accidentally, he sees his parents, and so he obviously wants to talk to them, and, he's kind of in awe. Like, these are my parents when they're my age.
Yeah.
So he accidentally messes up how they meet, and he himself is put in that situation instead of where his father should have been. Which, speaking about that, though...
Really creepy.
But when I was watching it... Creepy, yes. When I was watching it this time, I was trying to think about his dad in his place. Like, sleeping on that bed, and with her, like, creepily watching over him and taking off his pants and whatever, and
Right,
I couldn't. Yeah. I almost like couldn't picture it. Like, it seemed like he would have been so out of place that I wouldn't have bought him, like, her falling in love with him.
Yeah.
In that case.
Well, I've always had a theory about the reason why his mom's attracted to him. I think it's like she's a hormonal teenager who is feeling this pull that because it's almost, and this is a kind of headcanon theory I have about it. One, they say that you always are attracted to people one way or another that remind you of your family in some sort of way. It's just a natural sexual, psychological thing that happens. And two, if she might be mistaking this natural maternal instinct towards Marty in like a sexual way. It's kind of getting mixed up with her hormones, because the movie does go out of its way to say once she kisses him, like the attraction dies.
Yeah.
Like, it's like she suddenly, all of a sudden, like, it becomes clear and she's not mistaking the pheromones or whatever. Mm-hmm. And she realizes, she says, like, it's like kissing like
my brother.
My brother. It's like, it's weird. It doesn't feel right to her. So it's almost like she has this natural pull that, like, the universe, like, gives to her, and she just mistakes it for attraction. Mm-hmm. When it's really more about, like, oh, that's my son. But, like, of course she's not going to think that's my son, naturally. So, I mean, it is a little weird. It definitely was a risky pull. I know that for 4 years, studios turned down Bob Gale's script almost singly because of the incest storyline. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know Disney was very excited about it, but the one thing they said was, like, well, we can't have the mom fall into that's just too raunchy. Mm-hmm. And then he went to Universal eventually after Robert Zemeckis did Romancing the Stone. Mm-hmm. Steven Spielberg was always interested in it, but Steven Spielberg didn't have enough clout at the time of Universal to get them past some of the problems they had with the script and the concept. Mm-hmm. Originally, the script was a little bit different. There was a lot more going on. Bob Gale had several rewrites, but that incest storyline stayed in.
Interesting.
So, but actually, Universal, in a rare move from studios, wanted the film to be raunchier. They felt that there needed to be a little bit more of a, back then, Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Porky's and, Revenge of the Nerds were movies that were really big out then. And those movies are really raunchy, especially when you think about, like, the more PC culture of our time. Mm-hmm. And so they actually wanted more raunch factor and more language and more sexual undertones. Mm-hmm. So Gale eventually, with the pool he had coupled with Zemeckis and Spielberg, was able to do the movie how he wanted to do it.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah, it definitely has some of those, as you're saying, more risque themes, like the incest, but also the violence. And you mentioned earlier he almost, like, rapes her.
Yeah.
Almost rapes her, rapes her in the car.
And then,
like, not almost, like, he is going to.
He's going to.
Yeah, he's going to.
If George doesn't step in,
Yeah.
She's going to get sexually assaulted.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's like luckily Biff has such a temper that if someone interrupts him, he has to stop what he's doing and go out of his way to punch someone and push them on the ground. So,
well, plus back in the 80s, PG was a bigger. You can get away with a lot more in PG films. You can cuss more in PG films back then. I don't think PG-13 was invented not invented, but I don't think it was a rating back then.
Yeah, I agree because especially in this movie, and even when they still show it on TV, they don't bleep it out. But there's a few cuss words that, like Doc says, you're going to see some serious shit, which they do still say on TV, which I think is interesting that it's, they haven't gone back and, try to change it for TV or anything. It's still, which I like. And so it kind of helps it to feel a little bit more realistic than too much fantasy of it,
Right.
which it is very fantasy, but, okay, so let's talk about theme then, since we're kind of talking about it. So obviously they use time as an overall theme for the movie. I think the tagline on the poster is, he's never on time for school, he's never on time for dinner, and then one day he wasn't in his time at all.
Right.
Literally
right.
like the tagline.
That's true.
Which is like, yeah, I guess. But when you're watching the movie, he actually doesn't say anything about him being late for dinner. So he's actually there before dinner starts, just, so you know. But they do use time as an overall theme for the movie and to represent Marty's character. There's lots of little bits that you can catch throughout the movie. Obviously, him being late, his timing is also always off. He's late for school. Every time he tries to kiss his girlfriend, someone interrupts them. When Doc is telling him about time travel, he listens to his watch like it stopped working. All those kind of things. So I do like that. That kind of really helps to elevate the film, that all these people who are working on this really took the time to put in details like that. Of course, in the opening shot of all the clocks in Doc's garage, I guess, there's one of a man hanging off of the minute hand that clearly foreshadows the end of the movie. If you've seen the movie and then you see the beginning again, you can clearly tell that that's exactly what they were going for, which I like. I think it's
It
it's
really
not
pays
too
off.
it's not too quick of a shot, but it's also like, it's, you can see and you can tell, and they want you to notice it, which I appreciate. And we also mentioned the plutonium under the bed, which I thought was interesting because they had these huge hazmat suits on, right, when they're putting it in the car, but he can just keep it in a box under his bed.
Well, I think the box makes it safe, but when it's out of the box,
Okay, but if you're gonna steal plutonium and it's unsafe, and even if it's in a pretty solid box, don't put it under your bed. At least put it somewhere else that's not where you're sleeping.
But it says a lot about Doc Brown as a character.
True.
That he's not really thinking of, he does not, as much as he's an inventor, he does not think in the long term. He's thinking about, what am I trying to do right now? He has patience, but he also is very scatterbrained, which is a running theme that causes, throughout the entire trilogy, many problems.
True. Very true. Which something, I'll pose a question that I have. Did Doc try to build the time machine after 1955 because Marty was there?
I think originally no, because he made it without it happening. Because in the original timeline, Marty wasn't there, so he just made it himself.
Yeah.
But that is interesting because when Marty's back there, he does kind of create other things, invent stuff like a skateboard or rock music that theoretically, if you were to go back to he did go back to the 80s, but maybe he was the one that originally is now the inventor of those things, more or less. So I wonder if him in the 50s accelerated those inventions.
That's what I was thinking, because I think it was clearly on his mind because he did invent the flux capacitor before Marty showed up. He did think of it and he knew what it was for. But I think Marty being there helped it to, become more of a forefront in his mind, because after he leaves in 1955, if we're just going by this movie, not the other timelines from the trilogy, he wants to literally has to make sure that he invents a time machine by 1985, or else it kind of negates all of what happened. And that's a whole nother thing. That's a whole nother, like,
Right.
I can't even
Wrap your brain
I can't even wrap my brain around
that.
that. But I thought that was interesting and something that I thought about, like Doc's side of that. You know, we follow Marty through the whole thing, but, you know, Doc invents all these things, and it does kind of imply that everything he invents doesn't really ever work.
Right.
Except for Marty shows up, he's a time traveler. I showed up in a time machine that you invented, and then he's, you know, that kind of, I'm sure that helped to get him going, you know?
Right.
Well, Doc did learn something new because, obviously that day he just thought of the flux capacitor, but when Marty comes by and he's watching the video of himself in the 80s talk about it, he's surprised to hear it's 1.21 gigawatts.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, that's too much energy. I can't ever do that.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's surprised by it, so he must not figure that out in the 50s. But now in the 50s, he knows he needs 1.21 gigawatts.
Right.
True. Yeah.
So he might have been sitting on his hands for a long time, for about 30
Yeah,
years.
waiting for the
Yeah.
DeLorean to show up,
Right. Like,
waiting to get the plutonium from the Libyans, that kind of stuff, to make sure it
Perfecting
happens
it.
at the same night.
right, because he knows it has to happen, because the movie does make a point of saying once a time loop is closed, it repeats itself. Because Marty comes back to 1985, and he sees himself go into the past, and it's assumed that he is going to do these same things in the past that he did the first time.
Mhm.
Right.
So at the end of this movie, Doc has a time machine that goes off of not plutonium, like off of trash, basically, like aluminum cans and, you know, banana peels, whatever. So I guess I'm wondering if in the original timeline, when Marty, quote unquote, didn't go back to the past, and, you know, 1955 happened, and then 85, and he invented the time machine and used plutonium. After Marty was there, he obviously experienced what needed to happen in order to time travel. So maybe he spent that time thinking about what's a different way that I can, you know, find energy to fuel this. If
Right.
what you're saying is true, that he was probably sitting on his hands for a long time because he already knew how it worked in 1955, but couldn't use it until 1985, you know, for 30 years, trying to think of a better way. What's a way that if I'm trapped somewhere and can't get plutonium, because it's clearly not freely available everywhere, what's a different way that I can use it to fuel this? You know, maybe
Right.
that caused him to think that way.
I
which is what
always
we said
thought
at the
that
end.
I always thought that the trash was a result of him going to the future and the technology being better to get
Mhm.
the energy out of the trash.
True.
That too.
easier.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
but like maybe the idea
Right.
of wanting to find a different way
Yes.
too was affected. Yeah. Did you?
Well, I was wondering, because I don't know if you have this in your notes, Jen, but this question too: when do you guys think he figured out he was going to get killed by the Libyans?
Ooh.
Because he makes the point in the movie saying, "I don't want to know." He
Yeah.
feels he already knows too much, and so he rips up the note that Marty gives him that's
Mhm.
supposed to save his life and tell him, like, "Yo, the Libyans are going to kill you on the night I travel back to the past."
Yeah.
But you see in the future that he's taped it up and he's actually looked at it. The question is, how long did it take him? Did he do it almost immediately? So did he know for 30 years, I'm going to go to these Libyans and I'm going to get the plutonium from them and they're going to try to kill me, but I'm still going to do everything exactly the same way because otherwise I might mess up something?
Mhm.
Or did he kind of like, at the last second, just be like, all right, he seemed really freaked out about that day. I try and travel.
As it's
I'm gonna check. It's an interesting thing because he clearly kept on to it for a while, so he kind of did keep it as a failsafe in one way or another.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to think, like, because on one hand he could have for 30 years known I'm going to get shot on this
Yeah.
night,
Right.
or he didn't. He only knew for maybe a few days.
I did have not that exact note, which is a really great point to bring up. I had something similar of what's the origin of Doc and Marty's relationship? How did they become friends? How did they meet? We don't know. So, like, what if, in that sense, you know, he didn't want to know, he was going to live his life and just whatever will be, will be. But, you know, he sees Marty get born. He knows what's going to happen. He becomes friends with him. You know, he befriends him and he cares about him. He cares about him in 1955 after knowing him for a day. You know,
Right.
they have that instant bond. And so I think, you know, what if there's a whole other story that we never get to see of Doc wanting to, you know, not even interact with Marty and having to struggle, like,
Yeah,
what
those
if I
30
never meet him? What
those
if I
30
never,
years.
you know, affect him?
Right.
What if I never make him come back to the past? And then kind of realizing, well, maybe that's supposed to happen. And then he, is close to him and is like, I don't want to do that. He's,
Yeah, they're clearly friends.
What if there's something important that he has to tell me and he cares about me, I care about him, maybe I should just read the note. That's all speculation, of course, but I think it's very interesting. I'm very interested if I ever meet, Robert Zemeckis, hopefully one day, but say, how did they become friends? I would love to know, what caused them, because they're so different. He's a teenager, and Doc Brown is a scientist, and it seems like, when would their paths interact? It's not like Doc Brown is like an old friend of his parents. Doc Brown doesn't really ever interact with his parents, except for when his mom shows up at her house. But even then, she doesn't even notice that he's there.
Right.
Well,
So,
yeah, to her, he's his uncle.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, so there's no prior relationship. It's not like he's a family friend.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. I never thought about that.
And there's no answer to it, unfortunately. But I thought that was interesting, and so maybe, maybe there's something there that, he's very sympathetic character. He's helping Marty. He doesn't. Marty could be full of shit, and he doesn't know that this. That maybe he's like pulling his leg. That this whole thing works, and obviously he shows him the flux capacitor, and that really convinces him. But he's really going on trust of knowing Marty a week.
It's true. I mean, because Doc Brown really has no ulterior motives in the movie. It's just like his passion for everything is purely the knowledge or the sense of accomplishment of his inventions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, as a scientist, when Marty shows up on his doorstep, he's like, "Get away from me! You're crazy!" And then as soon as Marty's like, "No, just today you hit your head," and he's like, "Wait a second!" And then he sees the flux capacitor. He's like, "Wait, no, that's my thing. Like, I know I'm going to create that one day."
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where he is convinced when he shows him the DeLorean behind the sign.
Right.
Yeah. No, I agree. Even with that, though, there's still a little bit that if I was in Doc's place, I would still doubt a little bit. I mean, time travel is, even for someone who invents these crazy things, is still like such a big leap for anyone to really take, which we see in the second movie when Jennifer passes out when he tells her. So, but I just thought that was interesting, and I would love to know their origin story.
Yeah, they don't even as much as hug until the end of the movie. But they're close, and it is interesting to wonder if it's never really explained why they hang out.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like clearly Marty has some curiosity about science. There's some sort of thing, because another thing that's never really explained.
Well, in the beginning, Marty goes over there just to play the guitar. Like,
Right.
I feel like, they're friends and they just maybe hang out, or maybe Marty watches his house, which he doesn't do because the house was really messed up and dirty. So
Right, right,
Yeah.
right. Well, we don't know how popular Marty McFly is, because he comes from an unpopular family. Sure, he dresses cool and he does the skateboard and he's on the guitar, but he doesn't get into the school show.
he has no friends besides his girlfriend.
That's true. He doesn't really seem that cool. I had never thought about that before. I don't think he's a popular kid. He doesn't have, and maybe that changed when his parents became better people in the
Right.
storyline.
Right.
Yeah, he has
better
the
people,
the
but
cool car.
The cool car, right.
has the cool car and stuff, but he was always more of a down-to-earth guy, so maybe he was house-sitting for Einstein or something and needed some cash for a guitar and, whatever, and they met, but
Yeah, because he goes. I mean, the movie does a very good job of parallels and comparisons, and he is not popular. You don't really get any sense that he's popular in the future or the present. And when he goes back to 1955, he's like a god, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so it seems very hard to believe that, like, as a character and with all the little mini arcs and storylines and character development, that he's going from popular to even more popular. It seems like he's going to, like, not necessarily unpopular, but just not necessarily, like, well known to, oh my gosh, I'm the coolest person around. Because if his dad is that geeky, and his mom, at least the mom that's in 1985 in the first timeline,
drunk.
Yeah, like a drunk, depressed woman. It's like,
Yeah.
he can't. I mean, it's hard to believe that, like, if his dad's that nerdy, that something that's not in him. You know what I mean? Like, it's got to be there somewhere.
Yeah, that's a really good Good point. And I also think it's interesting to compare who Marty is with who Doc is, which is something I hadn't thought about until you were talking about his popularity. Marty is very much someone who he's determined, but he's also very beaten down. And he's not someone who's going to go out of his way to try something new, I think, in the original storyline. Maybe after he time travels, but originally, I don't think he's someone who, yeah, he tried out for the dance, but he played, I don't know. I mean, I don't think he played badly, but it doesn't seem, his girlfriend was trying to convince him, hey, you need to send those tapes to the record companies, which is like the most generic line ever, by the way. But Doc is someone who is always willing to try something new and in a different way, I would say. And I think having them together really complements that. They really challenge each other. Marty's determined, but Doc is, he's a thinker. He thinks outside of the box.
Right.
And they're both unpopular people. Doc is not a popular guy in I almost said Stars Hollow, I'm thinking Gilmore Girls. In Hill Valley, thank you. And so I think maybe that also is a way that they came together.
It makes sense. I mean, you don't really ever question it. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to speak for Matt, but I've never questioned it. Mm-hmm. Like, I've never questioned their friendship. Like, this isn't real. How these two become friends. Now that you bring it up, I'm like, yeah, how these two become friends. Mm-hmm. But I've never watched it and thought, oh yeah, why did they hang out with each other? It just seems like
they just do.
They just do.
Yeah.
They just do. And maybe that's for the best. Maybe Bob Gale, who knows how he originally wrote the script, but maybe, there was some point where he's just like, less is more.
Yeah, I was going to say, it helps the movie out a lot more to know that they're already friends. If their act one was them meeting each other and then him trying to bring along Marty to some adventure, it would be more boring. But since they already know each other, it's...
Well, it's a positive father figure for Marty, who in the original timeline does not have that. His dad is, for lack of a better word, a loser.
Right.
Honestly, he doesn't try. He doesn't stand up for himself. He does his boss's work for him, and lets his boss hit on his mom or on his wife. Right. And Doc is very different from George. So I think in just a basic writing sense, I would think that they needed to show the contrast between, how Marty is such a good person at the end of the day, if he has these kind of shitty parents sometimes who don't make the best choices, don't stand up for themselves, but he also does have someone in his life who is a positive role model. That's what I kind of always saw Doc as. They're friends, but he's also a positive figure for him.
That's true. I think there definitely is a fatherly figure going on there.
Mm-hmm.
And who can blame him? His dad's pretty lousy.
Yeah, but he gets better, and Marty changes it. Yeah,
he gets better.
So I want to talk about the consequences of time travel. One question that I thought of that I hadn't thought of before when I've seen this movie was, are his siblings disappearing in 1985?
Probably, yeah.
Probably, yeah.
Had you ever thought about that? I mean, I kind of, maybe in a very vague sense, like, his brother's gone from existence. But, like, in 1955, it doesn't really matter because he hasn't been born yet.
I think it's constantly changing.
But if, both timelines are technically existing together, then... Marty's still there, does half of his head disappear? How does that work?
Well, we saw his hand starting to disappear.
We see his hands.
I always viewed it as, like, if it's not done by this point in the past, then the present as he knows it will be gone forever. I never really thought about it existing concurrently.
But I feel like it doesn't show it concurrently, so we don't really know. Right. But I do think it does happen. As soon as George punches Biff in the face, he became a different person. And it happened in 1955, and then I think it also immediately changed all of that, the future.
Well, it does seem to operate, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Matt, is this operating on a parallel universe sort of timeline? Because that's like if you throw a rock at a tree in like 1955, in 1985, immediately a little dent in the wood shows up. Is that happening?
I think it's one timeline that is affected by the actions in the past.
Actually, in the second movie, they do talk about it because that is more of a plot line in the second movie because he goes back to
That's right. He
1955
writes it on the
again,
board.
and there is parallel timelines.
That's right.
Is how he describes it as they're both happening at the same time, but one event brings us to, if it changes something, it brings us to a different timeline from that compared to what used to happen.
Yeah, and we'll get to that with the second movie.
Yeah.
But with this movie, I like the way that they use time travel because the consequences, they're so localized that it helps the story out so much more than trying to get too bogged down in the scientific facts of it all. It's just, I have to get my parents to kiss by this night or else I won't exist anymore.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of really what that simple goal, and it makes the tension much more realized, and it's a better way to tell the story, I think.
I agree with that. We won't get too deep into the sequels too much, but I never was a fan of the sequels, and I think that may have been part of the reason. It just wasn't. When you try to explain the time travel like that in a movie of that nature, it does kind of take some of the fun out of it a little bit. It is kind of mysterious. Like, you don't really know what's happening to his siblings and brothers while he's disappearing. Have they disappeared? Mm-hmm. Are they are they waking up and looking at their hands and all of a sudden, they're fading through? Which would be a horrifying scene.
First the head goes.
Right, first the head goes. So, they're walking around headless.
A really chopped up part of his head just disappears.
That'd be horrifying. That enters, a different whole genre of the 80s.
Yeah.
That gets into, some Wes Craven territory or something. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, that would be interesting to see.
That would be interesting to see.
But I agree. I think it's because it's so localized, it's just Hill Valley. Mm-hmm. You never have to think too much about it. Obviously, it does ripple out into other things in the world because he becomes a famous science fiction writer and all this jazz. Mm-hmm. But the little touches they show do say that little things do make a difference.
Yeah, the consequences, like the pine tree being knocked down. Now it's Lone Pine Mall.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So while we're on consequences, there was a clip I wanted to show from after Marty's time travel to 1955, and he goes into the diner, which I think he goes there because that's a place that he knows, because he kind of walks in like he's been there before, but it's very changed from what he knows. Because we don't actually, and maybe that was a deleted clip of this diner from 1985, but we don't actually see it in 1985. But this is him in the diner, and then his dad walks in, so he's sitting next to his dad, and he's realizing Biff comes in and starts bugging George, and hey, McFly, and that's the whole famous scene, hello, McFly, etc. So this is after Biff has left, and Marty's looking over and realizing that he's sitting next to his dad as a teenager.
What? You're George McFly. Yeah, who are you? Say, what do you let those boys push you around like that for? Well, they're bigger than me. Stand tall, boy. Have some respect for yourself. Don't you know if you let people walk over you now, they'll be walking over you for the rest of your life. Look at me. You think I'm going to spend the rest of my life in this slop house? Watch it, Goldie. No, sir. I'm going to make something of myself. I'm going to night school, and one day I'm going to be somebody. That's right. He's going to be mayor. Yeah, Mayor. Now that's a good idea. I could run for mayor. A colored mayor, that'll be the day. You wait and see, Mr. Carruthers. I will be mayor. I'll be the most powerful man in Hill Valley, and I'm going to clean up this town. Good. You can start by sweeping the floor.
So I wanted to show that clip because we're talking about consequences, that kind of affects, and I did want to talk about this too, the character of Goldie, who in 1985 is mayor and is running for re-election. We see his re-elect Mayor Goldie Wilson, whatever, and there's the car that shouts it around town. So my question is, in this scene we see Marty recognizes who this is after the diner guy says, watch it, Goldie, and he's like, Goldie? Oh my gosh, this is the guy who's going to be mayor. And so he kind of just blurts out, yeah, he's going to be mayor, because he's giving this speech, and it's very mayor-esque already. So how would Goldie become mayor if Marty hadn't gone to 1955 and said something? Is he just ambitious enough that we are just supposed to believe that eventually his path would lead
Yeah,
him
because he
there?
said he's going to night school.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So,
he already has that drive.
right.
Mhm.
Though it is make clear that Marty saying you're going to be mayor is the first time he's thought of directing that energy towards going into politics.
Yeah, at this point. But he becomes a mayor in the 80s.
So he must have known.
There's like 20 years of him.
Figuring it out.
Figuring it out.
And who knows how many times he's been mayor? Because mayors, being in
Mhm.
the city, you can be mayor on limited terms.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So this could be like his 4th or 5th or 6th time as mayor.
And it's also interesting that Marty's not saying, yeah, you should run for mayor. It's, you're going to be mayor. I've already seen you become mayor. You're going to be that mayor. What if that had affected him becoming mayor, on the reverse side? It didn't, and it wasn't a big plot line or anything, but that kind of shows, that was just a quick clip to kind of show that Marty being in 1955, he is out of place, he is affecting things without realizing what he's doing. And and he doesn't get to, if he had gone to Doc's right away, it probably would have saved everybody a lot of trouble. But but first, he has to wander around Hill Valley and,
I mean, I think history is rewritten, but the key moments are still hit to make his present day still more or less be the same. Like, obviously the family's different, but we assume he's still the mayor in the present day.
Mhm.
We still know that him and Doc have friends enough to still have him go back in time the night of the shooting still. So it's still more or less the same day, the present day, except that it's different for Marty's family, essentially.
Right.
Like, they're the most affected by his family, and Biff are the most affected by his choices. Everyone else is kind of like, because everyone else is like, okay, this wild day where like the guy on a skateboard came in.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really necessarily change their course of like their history.
Except the one time that Marty actually chose to affect his present day was when he wrote the letter to Doc. That's when he said, okay, you know what? I want my present day to be better than it is.
Right.
So I want to save Doc's life by letting him know beforehand.
Mhm.
That's where he actually decided to make the change to his present day.
Yeah. He knowingly made that choice.
That's a good point.
And he didn't do it lightly. It wasn't like he just blurted it out to him, which he could have done and he wanted to do, but he also respects Doc enough that he wanted to ask him, hey, I really need to tell you something important, and Doc's like, no, don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, consequences.
Yeah.
But, do you guys think it's crazy that his parents met the same day that Doc invented the flux capacitor?
I mean, it's a crazy coincidence. I mean, and that the clock tower gets struck around the same week.
That week, yeah.
I mean, there's obviously a lot of crazy coincidences.
Convenience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very tight-packed.
But I have no issue with that. I mean, otherwise we'd be sitting around watching a lot of stuff happen that isn't important.
Okay, so what is an enchantment under the sea? Because, I mean, I get that it's the name of the dance, but like, enchantment under the sea, what does that mean?
Maybe someone's enchanted under the sea?
Under the sea. I don't know. I mean, this seems like a loosely themed dance party.
So why wouldn't it just been under the sea? Why is it enchantment?
It's the 50s.
It's the 50s, and it's prom, and you want to make a sound. Under the sea, that could mean a lot of things. Under the sea could be drowning, but enchantment under the sea means it's magical.
That's true.
Okay.
Submerged. Like, you wouldn't want to go to a dance called Submerged for like your prom. Like, submerged. Oh, what's that mean? Oh, it means you're drowning. Someone's got their hand on your head.
That's funny. So I did a tally while I was watching this of time-related jokes or puns or comments, and there was about 10. There was one line at the very end, so it wasn't too bad actually, because I think we'll come across movies that do it a lot more. And this movie keeps it relatively light. There was a quote at the end that I had to give like 2 or 3 points for because it's such a blatant line. Well, 2 of them actually. One is when Doc says, "We have to take you back to the future," and he literally just points straight at the camera.
Right.
It's like, okay, let's get you back home. That's more reasonable. But there's a line at the end when Marty is late meeting Doc at the clock tower because he's trying to get his parents together back at the dance. And Doc says, "You have no concept of time," which is like not a bad line. It just was like, "Buh," was my reaction to it.
Do you guys have a favorite line from the movie?
Yes, mine would be Nickels' worth of free advice. Because of, what is that? What? Okay.
I don't know if it's just like a little favorite throwaway line is when he's like, "I've built modeled the town. I'm sorry, it's not at scale. It's I didn't have time to make it to scale," which is like, wait, you mean you're gonna build a whole other town?
Yeah, it's not painted. He said,
Like it's not painted. Like he's so like this. He's so like kind of like disappointed in like his incredible like made in 3 hours scale model of the town.
right.
So
Yeah, I think mine would be just near the end when Doc's freaking out. He says the consequences can be disastrous. Just the way he says it just is funny.
Yeah, that was funny. Did you guys notice when Doc first makes his entrance out of the DeLorean, when it like goes down the ramp and all this stuff, and he gets out and he looks like he does like a Kramer entrance.
yeah, a little
Very
head
much.
shake.
But he's all if you viewers, audience, if you watch that scene again, see if you get that same.
Yeah.
There's also a little nice exchange between him and his dad where he's saying like, and he's trying to get his dad like to act tough. And he's like, "Do I have to cuss?" He's like, "Yes, damn it, you have to cuss."
Yeah.
It's like,
I thought it was funny after kind of Marty saves the day and he says his goodbye to his parents. His parents like, "Marty, that's a good name," but then in the present day, they named their second son after Marty, not their first son.
right,
Like you
What's
think
his
that
brother's name?
I don't remember.
right. It's not a good name.
I
Yeah,
don't even.
It's not a good name as Marty McFly.
maybe she forgot. And
Yeah.
was like, oh yeah, Marty, that guy.
Yeah, remember that guy who like I had the hots with for a little while?
Yeah.
I
I thought it was
kissed
funny.
out with, and he tasted like my brother. So I was like, ah.
So, did you notice on Doc's van at the parking lot, it says 24-hour scientific services?
No.
So, like 3 in the morning, you're having a science emergency, you can just call Doc and he'll come right to
He'll
you.
come right to you.
I just
man.
thought that was really like a funny little bit.
Mhm.
A little trivia note that I found out, totally unrelated to anything that happens to the plot, but originally one of the producers for Back to the Future thought that Back to the Future was too. He said he felt that it was either be too confusing or too straight on for a title, so he wanted to call it Spaceman from Pluto or something like that. And it's like when you think about like, what in the world was he thinking?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like an inside joke in the movie. It's an Easter egg in the movie, but the name of the movie also. It's just so weird.
It's so strange. Like, and I honestly feel like Spaceman from Pluto. It sounds like a silly, like no way that could affect it. But as we've learned from this movie, one choice can make a big difference. I just feel like a lot of people, if they saw on because back then you're not. I mean, yeah, you had TV and commercials, but you're really looking at the showtimes in your paper, and you see a movie called Spaceman from Pluto. First thing you think is B movie with like
a
cheap
gray
lasers.
alien.
Yeah, you're like, I'm not watching this movie. I'm not gonna. But Back to the Future has more of a like, what does that mean?
And it
Yeah.
would have something to do with outer space, which this movie doesn't.
Right.
So,
Right.
so we talked about the consequences. We haven't really talked too much about the scientific accuracy of the DeLorean and the flux capacitor. Do you have, Matt, some knowledge about that?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, for the most part, if you talk about science accuracy, Back to the Future, travel to the past is mostly going to be impossible. So it's more interesting to talk about the science in the movie more or less to try to like kind of buy in on some creative liberties they take. So if you look at the flux capacitor, it creates a field in front of the car that's activated by the energy and the speed. And so if you were to kind of maybe extrapolate that to quantum mechanics and maybe exploit some sort of quantum field to maybe go back in time, I think that's maybe the best I can come up with. But I mean, if in real life this won't be happening, it's nearly impossible in real life. But if I were to just think of a movie logic, this movie's really good at its science. If you were to just take some simple,
concepts. Yeah, that's what I like about it too, is that it's not overly complicated. So it's very much a movie that an average moviegoer would be able to understand and follow, compared to some of the other movies that we're going to be doing later on are a lot more complex, and you have to kind of really understand the rules of time travel in that film and
Right.
just how consequences work with it. So this movie does a good job of really just laying it out. And really the relevance of the story for the time travel is the entire story.
Yeah, it's very relevant.
It is very relevant. The entire story is about time traveling. It's,
Fixing the
beginning to
timeline.
end. It's time. It's,
It's
clocks.
not
it's-
just plot,
yeah.
but also the tension that builds up because it has to happen at this point, like with a lightning strike. It's
Mhm.
happening in a minute. You know it's going to happen in a minute, but then Doc has to fix the plug-in and then jump down to fix the other plug-in, and you just know that things have to happen in this time,
Mhm.
and so it just really it just makes the whole experience better.
Do you guys still, even though I know I've seen this movie 100 times, even though I know Marty gets back to his present and whatever, but it still gets me still.
Yeah,
I still
no,
get the
it's
anticipation
well made.
of,
Yeah, it's
of,
well directed.
is Doc gonna do it? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Right, you're like
Yeah.
it. Even if you've seen it a million times, it's well made tension.
Right.
It's still tense.
Yeah, it is. I
Yeah.
almost I
You're like, I don't remember taking it this long last time.
why is it so? It's a long scene too. It's,
Yeah, and I was like, oh wait, that's right, the tree's there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I almost
no,
forgot. Yeah,
the tree. No.
yeah.
Um,
But also on that note too, the set design really
Mhm.
does contrast the 50s and the 80s too.
yeah,
Yes.
you can definitely tell a difference. It was very, very well done in that aspect for sure.
And it's not overt. It's not like crazy. Like, look, everyone's wearing and they're all tilting their head. Some people I know, I've heard some people saying they wish they had done it in a different film stock. I'm like, no, or a different color. Like, no. It's showing that it's pretty much the same. It's in
Right.
the same universe. It's just different time periods.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is Pleasantville,
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I like the idea that it's almost like a camera crew could just be following Marty around and just kind of documenting his adventures, but it's not too different
Right.
filters and whatever. Okay, so would you want to experience this time travel? Specifically, put yourself in Marty's shoes, living as a teenager in 1985 and going back to 1955 and interacting with your parents and then being stuck and having to get back. Would you hide? Would you want to?
No. I would never want to meet my parents as younger. That just seems horrible. Because your parents, you just have a different image of them, and I feel like meeting them as younger people, and particularly after I've heard some stories about my dad, I was like, no, that would be weird.
Mhm.
And Bob Gale, the screenwriter, he came up with the idea when he went to his dad's basement and saw a yearbook photo of his dad and found out his dad was class president. He never knew this, and he was like, I don't know if I'd be friends with my dad in the past. And that's how I feel. Once if I go back and I don't like how my parents are,
Mhm.
when they're at my age. So no, I wouldn't want to do that.
Matt, what about you?
No. My parents are cool, so I think I would get along with them. But I think more for me, if I was my brain in Marty's body, I would not want to go just for the implications it would have on the timeline.
Right.
Mhm.
Once Doc says, the butterfly effect, essentially, then I would be like, all right, well, I'm going to stay in your house for the entire week. So I would not want to go just because, in real life, if you were to go back into the past, anything you do could change, the whole world, essentially, if you really mess it up that much. So I would just want to stay where I am.
Yeah, I guess I agree. I wouldn't mind going back to the 50s, but yeah, the consequences of it's also there's a lot put on Marty that's his responsibility. Doc doesn't really do much to help him get his parents back together. Once he's like, go up the road and, see ya, come here at this time. It's Marty's responsibility. The entire, a lot of the movie, really, if you watch it, is he has to get this stuff done. It's not someone holding his hand. It's not, Doc is helping him with the science, but it's really, this weight is on his shoulders. It's
Right.
his result, but, and it's also, part of it, that is also, it's not really that fair because he was just trying to escape terrorists.
Right.
He didn't mean to turn the time travel on. He just happened to, and then he jumped back,
trying
and
to go
drove over
90.
a pine tree, etc. Which, by the way, speaking of the Peabodys, have you looked at the daughter of the Peabodys? Because she looks about 35 and is trying to pass for about 12.
Oh, yes.
With her, she has these braids on, and she looks older than the mom, and it is
It's creepy.
weird. It's creepy. Yeah, it really distracts me.
Yeah, I think one thing too on Marty's responsibility, he just comes up with this plan is so he just comes up with it out of nowhere at the dance to get his mom to hit on him. He would enable his mom or he would make it pass at her, right? Wasn't that his plan? He was going to make a move on her, and then
she would reject him.
Yeah.
And George would come in and interrupt them and say, "Hey, you get off
Yeah.
her."
Like,
And
that's
then
his
he would
plan?
That's
Right.
That's the first thing that he could, I guess, think of, or that he could come up with that's feasible, because he knows that she's into him and she needs him to quickly dislike Marty so that she can fall in love with George.
right.
And
But he
that-
should have known that she was really
Yeah.
into him. She would not have said no.
Right. Well, he's also like what, 17, 18 years old.
They're all,
So
yeah.
he's like not really like, he doesn't really know women that well. I mean, he is really the only friend we ever see that he has inside his family is his girlfriend.
Yeah.
And you know that at least in this movie, you don't know a lot about the relationship.
Yeah.
So it's like, I mean, I wouldn't know exactly at age 18. How do I get some girl not to like me and then fall in love with this guy at the same time? Like, it is a complex thing. And he's funny, like, you're right, he does end up with a lot on his shoulders, and I wonder, obviously he can't tell it because it would mess up too much, potentially, but I wonder if Doc Brown knew that it was his fault that Marty was trapped in the past, if he would have been a little bit more like, oh, I gotta make this right, and blah, blah, blah. Because as far as, like, Doc Brown knows, he's just stuck in the past, but
Right.
he doesn't know the circumstances that led Marty to that.
Right.
Well, he does, because he watches the videotape at the very end.
Oh,
of it.
that's right,
He
yeah.
sees the
He
part
says-
that's "Run, Marty, run," and
Right.
he keeps rewinding it over and over again.
Right.
That's true,
That's
yeah.
a good
So
point.
he knows that something bad is going on. So maybe that, did Marty bring the videotape back with him?
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Yeah, he does.
Okay, so I was thinking maybe he kept that in the past, but
We know it's the only thing that he
Yeah.
has.
So lastly, before we do our final reviews, are there other things you noticed about the film that are not specifically time travel related? So I do have a few of those, if you want me to start. In the very beginning, the scene in Doc's, you really see his quote-unquote lab of his garage, and all these machines that are doing all this work. I thought it was interesting because in 1985, that was probably pretty impressive to see different machines kind of,
Right.
each one sort of a domino effect.
Like a
But in
Rube
2000,
Goldberg.
in 2015, not that impressive. I have to
Right.
tell you, watching a candle burner, dump a pile of dog food doesn't really do it for me. It doesn't impress me. It works, sure, but
Right.
it's kind of like Mousetrap.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's like you can do that on your iPhone now.
Hmm. Yeah. So that I thought was interesting. Of course, Huey Lewis makes a cameo in the beginning when Marty's playing Huey Lewis's song as his audition. Obviously, it's not Huey Lewis song; it's a Marty song. At the audition to play at the school dance, and Huey Lewis is one of the judges and says, "No, you're just too darn loud." I do like the bookend of that, and that Marty does actually get to play at the school dance. He does still play,
Right.
and that really gives him a lot of confidence, I think, for later in his life.
But he still goes too far at
He
the
does.
school dance.
Speaking of which, we do have that clip.
All right. All right. This is an oldie, but well, it's an oldie where I come from. All right, guys. Listen. This is a blues riff and B. Watch me for the changes and try and keep up, okay?
So, of course, that's Marty playing Johnny B. Good in 1955 at the school dance, and the kids are excited and dancing to it. It's right at the cusp of that type of music really
Right.
becoming popular. So, and you can really see the joy on his face that he gets to play and that they're into the music that he's playing. Of course, the nod to Chuck Berry and all that good stuff. Did you have a note?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite little kind of setups they do in Act 1 is having Lorraine's brother be in jail,
Mm-hmm.
Joe.
Joey,
And then when you go back in time, you see him as a baby behind the bars in the crib.
he just loves
yeah.
his bars.
I thought that was great. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was my favorite little connection between the 50s and the 80s.
That's true. I never noticed that.
Yeah.
Oh,
Really?
No, I've never noticed that. I'm thinking about it now. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so hilarious.
Yeah, he's in this, and I want to talk about that scene anyway. In 1985, when they're sitting down at dinner, and she had made the cake for Joey, who didn't make parole. And then in 1955, we see him as a baby, and he just loves his bars and cries whenever he's out. So we don't really feel bad that he didn't make parole. So I thought it was interesting, though, that when Lorraine is telling her kids about how they fell in love, first of all, George is not even paying attention. He's
Right.
watching TV, which really just says everything about their relationship,
Right,
I
right.
think. And then as she continues the story, at first she's excited, then she watches him and sees he doesn't really care about what she's even saying. It doesn't even faze him that she's talking about it. And she really gets sad. You can really
Yeah, it's
see
really bleak.
the sadness on her face and, and how that's affected her kids and their success.
Right.
They're not the most successful teenagers or young adults. So
Yeah, she can't meet a boy, and Marty's brother has a bad job. And in the new present day, she has so many boyfriends, and his brother is like always wearing a suit.
to the office, yeah.
And his dad is now a successful novelist of science fiction novels.
Yeah.
Right. His parents go on as big of an arc, though we don't see most of it, we just see the results of it and the origins of it. They supposedly go on a very big arc from where they go. You do kind of see a little bit with George, because he goes from like this kind of wimp to like standing up for himself multiple times. He has to do it really 3 times, calling the rule of thirds. He has to 3 times stand up for himself in order to create the positive future.
Yeah.
It happens.
And there's also someone at that dance after the 3rd time that is like, hey, George, have you ever thought about running for class president? Or, that really shows, hey, these people believe in him, and so now he will believe in himself too, and he'll write his book, and etc.
Yeah. A little moment it's not really much of a moment. It's something that's always threw me off, and I didn't realize until I did some research on the film. I always wondered why the actress who played Jennifer in the first movie was replaced by Elizabeth Shue in the second and third. I always just assumed that because Elizabeth Shue was a bigger name, that she was going to be a draw. But it actually turns out, and on a kind of a sad note, that the actress who played Jennifer, this is actually one of the last movies she ever did, because her mother ended up dying of cancer, and so the actress just didn't have the motivation to. She quit acting to take care of her mother, and then kind of in like a Rick Moranis type way, once her mother passed away, she just didn't have the excitement to do it. Another interesting behind-the-scenes fact that makes Michael J. Fox's performance that more impressive. Michael J. Fox was on the show Family Ties, and originally he couldn't be in the movie because they had another actor. I'm blanking on the name right now. The other actor who played him. They shot scenes with him, but the actor himself didn't feel like he was doing a good job. The directors didn't feel like he was doing a good job. They
filmed most of the movie, right?
Yeah, most of the movie. Amicably split ways. They were just like, the actor even said, like, I just didn't feel like I was right for the part. So they really wanted Michael J. Fox. He was always the number one choice. So they went back to the producers of Family Ties and were like, please, we need Michael J. Fox. So Family Ties made the biggest Sophie's Choice deal in the world with these guys. And Michael J. Fox agreed to the terms. He's like, Michael J. Fox still has to shoot Family Ties. So he either has to shoot on the weekends or after Family Ties. So all the day outside scenes are shot on the weekend. Any scene that you see that is shot at night or inside where they could fake it, Marty was shooting that after getting off the set of Family Ties. So Michael J. Fox was getting 5 hours or less of sleep, and he would wake up, go do Family Ties in a day, then he would drive to the Back to the Future set,
Universal.
And he would at Universal. He would do that, go to sleep, get back up, do it again, and he gets no days off because on the weekends he's shooting all the day outside scenes.
Wow.
And so Michael J. Fox actually, before the movie premiered, even when he was looking at test screenings, Michael J. Fox thought he had done a terrible job because he just felt so tired the whole time.
Yeah, he knew what he was thinking of when he was doing it.
Right, he was just really tired. So it took him years to actually even like the movie because it was kind of linked to a personal bad experience of like just how he felt not that he felt miserable on set, he just felt that he wasn't performing to the level he could.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm sure if you see a lot of the Family Ties episodes he's doing during that time, you can probably see that he's probably a little tired doing those as well.
Yeah. That's a very interesting note. I know that you and I previously in our lives, Matt, have talked about the ice on the car and the inconsistency. Did you want to talk about that?
Well, not the first time, but when I rewatched it recently on TV, I noticed there was ice on the car the first time. They made a point to say it's covered in ice. And I forgot that if it was there later on. And rewatching it, I noticed that the ice was back on there when he went back to the present day, I believe, in front of the movie theater. I think the ice is back on there. But I think the second time to the barnyard when they traveled, I don't think it was on there, but there was like steam, so it might have been there, But
yeah, because it doesn't immediately, cut to Marty in the barn.
Right, he might have been passed. He might have been knocked out.
It shows the Peabodys first, so But that is.
It is interesting why they put that in there, and I actually thought about it since it creates so much fire on one end. You see the fire on the wheels. It's like in physics, the conservation of energy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, since there's fire on one end, maybe there's ice on the other end. Maybe it balances out that way. I thought of that.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Oh man, I gotta watch that scene again now.
Mm-hmm. Just a few other small notes. There's of course the stereotype of looking at a newspaper to see what date it is. And I have a personal pet peeve, especially in movies and TV, when someone rips out a page in the phone book, because it seems like there's a lot of names on one page in a phone book. It's front and back. That's like probably 50 people, give or take.
Right.
And, you're ripping it out. He ripped it out, of course, to get Doc's address, but anyone else who tries to use that phone number, what if they're looking for a different Brown?
Right.
And they aren't going to find it because Marty is selfish and ripped out the entire newspaper page instead of just writing it down. That bothers me. That's just a personal pet peeve.
You're like, that's rude and inconsiderate.
It is. And it happens more than you think. Other notes that I had. Oh, I liked Marty had the timer at the very end of the movie in his car, so technically the timer went through time too. Because he didn't toss it, obviously. It was still in the car. And there was also a DeLorean time travel consultant in the credits, Ron Cobb. So, hey, Ron Cobb, if you're listening, give us some insight of what you did on this movie. That's pretty much all my notes. Did you guys have anything else you wanted to discuss?
That's pretty much it.
Anything else? All right, so let's do our final reviews. I will start. So we'll start with the movie rating of the movie by itself, and our comments about that, and then do a time travel rating of comments, like how the time travel was portrayed in this movie. So for the movie rating, I guess we could do it out of 10.
Yeah.
This movie really is 10 out of 10. It's pretty.
I
There's obviously just a few. We were really nitpicking the ice on the car, but there's, this is a movie that every time I watch it, it's nostalgic for me, and I love it. I enjoy it. I can get lost in this movie. So it really is 10 out of 10 for me for the movie itself. What about you?
Yeah, I would say 10 out of 10 as well. It's just, it's a good story. It's a good storytelling. It's tense, and it's also satisfying to watch.
Mm-hmm.
10 out of 10. It's virtually a flawless movie in terms of what it's trying to execute and deliver.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to really give it a lot of props. So 10 out of 10 as far as the movie goes.
And what about our time travel ratings? So mine, I guess later down we will be able to kind of compare them more when we've seen more movies.
Right.
But just from the movies that I've seen so far, this movie really is one that when you think of a time travel movie, this is immediately the first movie you think of.
Yeah.
Which is great, but there's a lot of different ways to show time travel in movies, but this one really does it well. They're pretty good with the continuity of the storytelling and how it affects it, and the time travel is very relevant in the movie, which I really appreciate. So I say 10 out of 10 for the time travel as well.
Yeah, they put a lot of care into how they're going to portray it and how they would use it in the story. So I really think that it's 10 out of 10 for me as well. It's really good use of time travel, and they also do enough effort to explain it, but also not too much that it gets kind of, you kind of lose the magic of it all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to get a little bit less than you guys. I'm going to say 9 out of 10. The only pet peeve I have with the time travel in this movie is it's less about the actual time travel itself, but how more it's utilized.
Mm-hmm.
I love Robert Zemeckis as a director, but Robert Zemeckis has this annoying tendency to make it that a character always alters the future, like radically from one little thing. He does it a ton in Forrest Gump. He does it in this movie, and it is a little bit. I think when you watch it as an isolated film, you're like fine, but I can't shake that this is Robert Zemeckis doing his Robert Zemeckis thing again, where it's like it's a little weird. It always a little bothered me that Michael J. Fox invents Chuck Berry's rock and roll, and I'm like, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. That always bothered me. So on little things like that, I have to give it a 9 out of 10.
Okay.
But other than that, I'm like, yeah, great.
I did also want to say the Rotten Tomatoes rating, which for those who don't know is if you go to RottenTomatoes.com, you can look up pretty much any movie, and it accumulates a percentage based on either a good or bad rating from critics who review the movie. So Back to the Future is 96%. And it has 69 fresh ratings and only 3 rotten ones.
Look at those 3 that didn't like it.
So the overall critics' consensus for it on Rotten Tomatoes says, inventive, funny, and breathlessly constructed, Back to the Future is rousing, a time travel adventure with an unforgettable spirit. And that really does sum it all up. One of the negative ones says, it's big, cartoonish, and empty with an interesting premise that is underdeveloped and overproduced.
That was in the Los Angeles Times. Sheila Benson. I think you're wrong, Sheila.
And she reviewed it recently, which is interesting. But, 9.5 out of 10 people love this movie. So there you go. Even that half person out there loves this movie. So
our famous half person.
Our famous half person. So normally what we would do now is see if there's any Twitter questions or Facebook questions about the movie that we could answer. But of course, because we're a new podcast, we don't have too many followers yet. But please follow us and comment. And you can even retroactively do a Back to the Future question, and maybe we'll answer it. Because we are still doing the second one and the third one later down the road, so those will still be coming. If you have Back to the Future questions,
general questions about
them. Mm-hmm.
General questions about time travel.
Yeah, anything really that you feel like we would be super qualified to answer, or just can give a speculated BS answer, whatever fits your question. So to plug our social media, we have a Twitter, we have an Instagram, we have a Facebook page. So on Instagram and on Twitter, we are at Time Travel Trio. So please follow us there. We are very attentive with our social media. And, if we like your comments or, on a picture or tweeting at us, maybe we'll follow you back and comment on your stuff and, ask you questions too. So who knows? And we also have a Facebook page. We are the Time Travel Trio podcast, so you can also, for those who may not have Twitter, you can also comment to us there on Facebook. We do events to help remind you when our next episode is going to be released on the podcast, and you can follow us on iTunes. Please subscribe, comment, and rate us. We are the Time Travel Trio. And Matt is going to talk about our upcoming episode, which we will be releasing every other Wednesday. So 2 weeks.
Yes, every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks.
So the next movie we'll be doing is called Time Crimes. It's a 2007 movie. I think it was originally released in Spain. It's a foreign language film, so it might be kind of hard to get it in English. But it's, I highly recommend trying to see it if you haven't seen it yet. It's a really good movie. It's directed and written by Nacho Vigalondo. And a brief synopsis of it is, a man accidentally gets into a time machine and travels back in time nearly an hour. Finding himself will be the first of a series of disasters of unforeseeable consequences. It's a really interesting movie. I've seen it before. I don't think Hyde has seen it before.
I've not.
And Jen has seen it before. So if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend seeing it. It's really interesting that
It will definitely be a very good time travel discussion with that movie. It's won awards, and how they portrayed time travel in Time Crimes is really great. And I do think it actually might be on Amazon Prime, so maybe check there and see if it's online somewhere. Hopefully, we'll also tweet out if we can find out officially where it is, and we'll let you guys know. So thank you for listening.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, travelers.
We are out of time. See you next time.